bring to the table, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are. And we're gonna ask people who have covered Pacquiao for a long time, who have seen him fight in the US, not just on TV, who have seen him train, who have seen him in his everyday workout. So I guarantee na they can ask naman, we can answer, they can answer the questions na we want to hear kasi they've seen him in the flesh. But first, let me open the floor for the opening remarks. He is my boss, Editor-in-Chief of INQUIRER.net, Mr. John Neri.
Please don't be afraid. I think my cold is on its way out, so I am not as contagious as I sound. I am always very happy to visit UST, whether it's for Inklings or for an Inquirer event. I always come away feeling energized, revitalized. There is something about the UST audience that makes me want to come back again and again. We have a special forum today, and if you saw the newspaper ad yesterday, we just said it was in UST, but we weren't accepting walk-ins because I think that if we did open this forum to other guests, I think we would fill this up and we won't have enough space for the students of UST. Say something about the role of the reporters that we've invited to serve as our featured speakers today. I don't know if you realize it, but we actually place a lot of pressure. We have a lot of expectations from our sports reporters. We want them, first of all, to report as accurately as possible. As Celeste has mentioned, all our featured speakers have had a chance to cover Pacquiao during his training camp and actually covered some or all of the fights of Manny Pacquiao. We expect our reporters then to be able to give us something specific, something vivid, perhaps even something graphic from their reporting. But on top of the accurate, precise reporting, we also expect our reporters, some of the country's best sports writers, to provide us deep analysis. And that is the main reason why we are here today. We've asked, in our ad, we call them some of the country's top boxing scribes, and in fact they are. We want them to be able to build on their reporting and tell us what makes Pacquiao tick, what makes Mayweather run, and what are the factors that, in their view, might determine the outcome of the fight on May 2 or May 3 in the Philippines. So, reporting as well as analysis. I look forward to today's forum. Like I've said, I have very high standards when it comes to UST participation. I'm looking forward to the questions from the floor. Once again, let me welcome you to the University of Santo Tomas. We would like to thank Professor Jerry and his students for making time for this. At the same time, we look forward to your questions during and after the open forum. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now let's hear it from UST Journalism Society President Ira Lebag.
Hello po, good morning everyone. To our journalism professors and students, Office for Public Affairs and our distinguished speakers, and the Inquirer Group, good morning. I would like to welcome you all to this event, Fighting Words, a roundtable discussion on the Pacquiao versus Mayweather fight. As a budding journalist, I think we should not only know the 5 W's and H, but also the essence of what makes a good journalist. This joint activity between INQUIRER.net and the Society will surely teach just that and brighten the minds of young journalists, make them think critically and practice good and fair reporting here in sports journalism and in general as well. On behalf of the UST Journalism Society Executive Board, I would also like to extend our deepest gratitude to INQUIRER.net for giving us this opportunity and to the Office of Public Affairs, to Sir Empeñano, for helping us organize this event. Thank you everyone for attending this roundtable discussion as a closing event of the Journalism Week 2015. Again, thank you and God bless.
Today, we will talk about the technical aspects of the fight of the century. It's not actually an official title, but that's what we call it, with the magnitude of this fight. But aside from that, as journalism students, I'm sure most of you are curious how these writers approach each coverage. Because I'm sure you assume, and I'm sure we can see na it's crazy during fight day. So much is going on, and how are they able to focus in one thing and produce a good writing out of all the craziness that's happening? So let me introduce to you to our panel and our moderator for today. First, he's actually one of the writers who have covered Pacquiao for the longest time. He actually started writing about him in 1996. And since then, he has covered almost all of his fights. He's also a graduate of UST journalism program. He is a veteran boxing writer for the Manila Bulletin, Mr. Nick Gyongko. Second, he started following Pacquiao in the early 2000s or late 1990s, depends. He covered most of the Filipino boxing champions training camp here in the Philippines. He was actually there during Pacquiao's last fight here in Manila. He is a writer and a sports broadcaster for PTV Sports, Mr. Dennis Principe. Yes. And last but not the least, his first coverage of Pacquiao was in 2006 for the Pacquiao Morales 3. Since then, he has covered most of Pacquiao's major fights in the United States. He is also a product of this university and one of the best writers I know. He's currently the assistant sports editor of the Philippine Daily Inquirer, Mr. Francis Ochoa. For our today's moderator, he actually helped us a lot in making this event possible. And for that, we are truly grateful. He was my thesis advisor, and he is my favorite professor, Mr. Jeremiah Peñano.
Good morning to everyone and to our panelists. And we would like to thank Inquirer Group and INQUIRER.net. Can we give Inquirer a hand for bringing this event to the University of Santo Tomas in the best sports writing school in the country. And this morning we are grateful that some of the veteran scribes in the sports writing community are here to not only dissect the fight for everyone, but to teach us the basics of the sport and how to write it. Because for the information of our panelists, two of which are products of the joint program, many of these students are taking sports writing with Professor Ana Shelo Perez. They do not know much about the sport. So with your permission, I will give a set of guide questions. So the context of this roundtable, first, this is the sport's most celebrated match to date, bigger than Tyson Lewis. And then the Philippines is in the spotlight of global boxing, this time the most important event of all, something that may never happen again in our lifetime. Not many Filipinos, including attendees here, and this is what I was saying a while ago, know the technicalities of boxing. So how will they write that story? Because I remember Professor Perez asked them to watch a Pacquiao Morales fight, and the students were scratching their heads, what is that punch called, or how did Pacquiao knock out Morales? So what they did to catch up was to replay some of the scenes of the fight. So with the permission of our panelists, we hope that you may guide the students about it. And please take note that this is a joint class between the subjects press ethics and libel law by yours truly and sports journalism. So as we would like to suggest to our panelists, on the baseline, one of you, with your permission, will talk about the basics of boxing, especially the types of punches. I hope somebody from the alumni here who are with INQUIRER.net can demonstrate in front of the class. And then for the journalists, as a baseline, another will share the basics of how to cover a boxing match because they have a current set of exercises on this sport. So this event is an opportunity for you to learn something new. And then we go to the experts' views on what do you think will happen and what are your predictions for May 2nd. And then later on, as Mr. John Neri of INQUIRER.net had mentioned, the open forum will be an opportunity for us to learn. And of course, those who will ask questions will get a free goyito. Okay, so and then in terms of dissecting the fight, as suggested by our Master of Ceremonies, Celeste Flores, the panelists can talk about the overall capabilities of the boxers in terms of their power, their speed, their experience, their tactics, and their intelligence, more importantly. And then, so that we can have a little basis for comparison, Celeste selected fighters whom both Pacquiao and Mayweather had fought, and probably that can form a little basis for the comparison. So both of them had fought Miguel Cotto. Juan Manuel Marquez, if you remember Juan Manuel Marquez, he was the one who knocked out Pacquiao with a lucky punch with 1 minute to go in the 6th round. And then Sugar Shane Mosley, Ricky Hatton, and the legend Oscar De La Hoya.
So talking about dissecting the fight, these are the 5 fighters who are similar opponents of both Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather Jr. And along the way, probably the 2 more veteran panelists will try to give you more outlook about what happened in those fights. As for my take, both fighters had different fight plans, and they approach those fights in different ways. And all of those 5 fighters also had different fight plans, except for the way they fought Floyd Mayweather Jr. Because I believe that all of those 5 fighters, which are listed here, tried to pressure and fought Manny Pacquiao, Mayweather in an offense-minded type of approach, whereas against Manny Pacquiao, I believe only 2 tried to be tactical, but all of them failed except for Marquez, who had 1 win against Marquez. So basically, that's my initial outlook about how these 5 fighters fought Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather Jr. So Nick Gilmo, the king, that's why he's in the middle.
First of all, I'd like to apologize for coming in late. It's hard to pinpoint, because it's having a styles-based fight. But these 2 fighters, Pacquiao and Mayweather, close, pretty even, despite the odds. They say it's 2-1, 3-1. It's just numbers. I think the odds should be even. But it's hard to compare each fighter with the fights that they fought. If you say that Mayweather easily picked apart Juan Manuel Marquez and Pacquiao was able to do that, it's wrong. It doesn't follow that if I beat up this guy and then he beat up this guy, I will be able to beat him up. He might even beat me. So that's boxing. You will only know what's going to happen when the bell rings. Strange things have happened before. 100-1 underdog winning the fight. But if you just study the fights, you'll just be able to come up with a certain percentage of forecast. It's hard. It's pretty hard. Even if the guy is 50-1, it's hard to discount the fact that there's going to be an upset. It's basketball. It's the ball is round. So boxing, anything can happen. One punch can decide a fight, the outcome of a fight. It's hard to predict. It's hard to predict.
As for my take we all know that this is a very important fight, and like Nick said, styles make fights. So I think the most interesting point of view when it comes to Pacquiao Mayweather is the fact that they bring two different skill sets to the ring, and it's so hard to really say who has the upper hand. And if we go through their common opponents, Nick's right. We cannot judge. We can just judge both fighters based on the common opponents. But at least it gives us a jump-off point as to what both fighters bring to the ring um, during fight night. And the prediction stuff is gonna be really, really very, very difficult because um, if there is any sport where upsets are really possible, um, I think it's gonna be boxing because, I mean, decades ago when Tyson was carving up opponents, no one ever expected him to lose to James Buster Douglas, and yet it happened. So um, the underdog story is always one of the most appealing narratives for me in boxing. So when it comes to Pacquiao Mayweather, I'm really more interested on in the things that they bring to the table because they're such two different fighters, and it always seemed like even before that um, no matter how long it took, these guys were meant to eventually face each other on the ring. So this to me will be the most exciting part of the fight. 5 years after it was first brought up, what will they bring? Will it be worth all the money that people are spending to be able to watch it or to be able to pay for pay-per-view? Those are the things that really intrigue me the most going into the coverage. Thank you.
Okay, so at first, you had heard our panelists give at least a general set of views about predicting the fight and what do you think will happen on May 2nd. But with the permission of the panelists, if we can follow at least a little outline so that the majority of the students can relate to the discussion. Because as I had said earlier, the problem is that many of them, and I guess many Filipinos still do not know much about boxing. And it's so quick a sport that it's really quite difficult to make a blow-by-blow account of the event. So I don't know if we could start with the first one, and probably some of the panelists can first give a little lecture or a little demonstration on the types of punches first.
Then siguro na lang, we will just describe the type of punches. And basically, ano naman, left or right, di ba? Unless you kick someone, which is foul. But the type of punches are straight, uppercut, straight, then overhand, and then hook, and then cross, which is between the hook and the straight, and the sign of the cross. Those are the type of punches that you usually see in a boxing fight. Especially with Manny during the early part of his career. Okay, so yun lang. So easy to determine because ano lang naman, you can determine few punches lang naman. So yun, so far the baseline in terms of the type of punches and as far as how to cover a boxing match, I think the appropriate person would be these two guys because they covered 90% of Manny Pacquiao's fights. Sir?
Any additional, Nick and Francis, at least about the basics of the sport?
How do you cover a fight? You show in the arena. You don't cover it on TV as much as possible. Unless you're not given a pass, you cover it in the media center. But if you're in the media center, you're allowed access into the gym or the arena. You make sure that you cover it live so you can invite the atmosphere, the electricity inside the arena and the ambiance, and you have to be there to not to feel the punch but to even hear it. Sometimes at ringside you can hear the punch. You can hear the corners shouting, giving instructions. You can even hear the fighters run. You can hear the fighter, even the blood. Sometimes it gets splattered at ringside. I've experienced it a few times. And also you get to rub elbows with those covering the the fight. We get to see how they write or describe what's happening, especially the guys at AP, saka yung sa mga blog, yung internet, yung mga online, yung mga real time. Sometimes you're amazed na how they able to describe what's happening almost instantaneously. What they do is, first round, they're not even looking at their computer laptops, they're just firing away. And then at the end of the round, makikita mo it's scripted, taga marami, nakukuha nila yung what's happening. As if, makita mo. Then after that, second round, third round, and shortly after the fight, you see, in a matter of 10-15 minutes, full-length article, meron na. Meron agad, and then the click of the button, transmitted na yung storya. And then, shortly after the announcement is made, kitang si Perfect yung storya na agad, in a matter of minutes. After the announcement is made, 5-10 minutes, yung storya na eh. Because of so it's technology. There were times when pwede kang to relax na. Sabi mo, mamaya pa ng deadline, but so I don't have time to think over dun sa mga posibleng angles. But of course, you have to take note of you don't have to take note of just a punch. You have to take note of what's happening, dami technicalities. For example, there is a cut or there is a foul, a bad move. You have to take note at exactly what time the round. For example, when you cut, you have to take note, for example, at the 1 minute and 30 seconds of the third round, this guy is out of the cut, or this guy got penalized for hitting low, or he was warned for using his elbow, for using his head. Once you take note of that, magaling na maisulat yan. It's easy. Ang importante lang, you have to know what happened in a round and the highlights. And, well, that's basically it. Ganun lang yung pag-cover ng boxing. But you have to know the rules. Kasi sometimes it's kind of complicated. No? Even me myself, minsan naisip ko, ano ba nangyari? Kasi you'll only know what happened when minsan after the fight, this guy was penalized 1 point or this guy was warned. No? You have to be vigilant talaga what's happening. Hindi pwede yung minsan kasi nangyayari, you're covering and you're tweeting. I don't think that's a good idea. Mawawala ka dun sa zone. So when you cover, and when you tweet, you just tweet. Titignan mo lang. Kasi tweeting kasi it's good, but it's bad. So make sure when you go to a fight, make sure na linawag sa editor, ano ba, magpo-cover ba ako, mag-tweet ako? No? Might as well cover than tweet. Just make sure.
As for me, I think when it comes to running coverages, and when I say running coverages, it's not that you go to an event, you cover it, and then you write something about it. It's usually you start covering it from its early stages until the event. I just want to point two things out, and one is when I cover a running event, I always try to latch onto a certain narrative, a certain flow, or you might want to have a certain discipline so that you are able to define what your coverage is. Pacquiao always lends himself to a ready narrative because he always says that he fights for the country, so it's always like that. But when it comes, when for example, Pacquiao Mayweather, there's so many different narratives. You want to stay disciplined, you want to stay focused on a certain narrative so your coverage doesn't just go all over the place. So it might be that this is the fight that people have been waiting for the longest time, or it might be that this is a fight between the two best boxers in their generation. But there's so many different narratives to stick to, and it's best always you try to pick one and let it govern your coverage of sorts. The second, one thing that really dissuades young journalists from sports writing is the jargon. Sabi nga ni Dennis, no, it's like so many terms. But I've always been a believer that you shouldn't be afraid you shouldn't be afraid if your jargon knowledge is limited, because sometimes minsan yung jargon minsan yung jargon is just really a lazy way to write, because it's there, the term is there, and you can use it, so you don't go into describing really what happened. And second, sports jargon has evolved so much that I remember the Pacquiao Hatton fight. Of all the stories that I wrote for that, the only one that made the front page after the fight was I listed the 10 different ways that, I think it was 12 different ways that different sports writers called the punch. So different news outlet, it was a different punch. They call it the hook, they call it the cross, they call it whatever. So it just goes to show that sometimes there's no longer a unified code of jargon. So it doesn't really you don't really have to be so technical about it. But as long as you can really if you can go to a place and capture the excitement, because remember your job. Sometimes you wonder why you are sitting in a seat that costs like $1,000. Why are you there in the first place? And your job is really to recapture everything, to be able to analyze, to be able to put your readers where you were during the fight. So those are the things that I just want to stress. It's just that you really have to latch on to a compelling narrative, and you don't have to be scared about if your knowledge of the sports terms is really mababaw or what.